I'm going to be talking to Teika Newton from the Climate Action Network about a new report that her organization has released about oil and gas transition and what to do with workers who may be laid off over the coming, next 5 or 10 years. But there's a deeper issue here, and that is competing visions for the future of oil and gas in Canada. We're a major, fourth largest oil and gas producer in the world. And so the two visions are one, which I think Teika's organization represents, which is that it's a sunset industry and workers are going to be losing their jobs. So they need some kind of a transition strategy. And then there's the other vision, which is the Alberta and oil and gas industry vision, which is that Asia is growing and their energy consumption is growing and there's an opportunity. In fact, there should be an expansion of oil and gas. And one of the points that the report makes is that we need to resolve this conflict between these two visions. Government has to step in, figure it out, and come up with a new vision for, between now and 2050, because energy is at the heart of the climate crisis and the energy transition. So I'm going to talk to Teika about the report, and welcome to the interview, Teika.
Thanks so much. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Well, look, I've kind of tried to summarize the conflict between these two visions, and maybe we'll start the interview with your take on those two visions.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that, like, the impetus for us to take on this report, the report's called Facing Fossil Fuels Future. It's quite a tongue twister. We released it yesterday, was to look at the future of work in the fossil fuel industry if Canada starts actually implementing policy, regulatory mechanisms, and industrial planning, aligning with the net zero by 2050 goals and the temperature goals of the Paris Agreement. So that is keeping global warming to under 1.5 degrees Celsius this century. So we did some not modeling, just extrapolating data that was publicly available through Statistics Canada and through the Rystad UCube energy data to look at what the impact would be on the workforce. What we found is that by 2050, about half of the current direct workforce, the direct jobs that are tied to oil, gas, and coal, will need to be transitioned into other forms of employment. But the bulk of that transition happens in the next 8 years or so, this decade to 2030. So we need to find about 56,000 new jobs for workers who are currently employed in the sector. The argument we put forward in the report is that government needs to be leading in ensuring that transition happens in a just, equitable way, hand in hand with workers who are helping to guide that process, who are having a say in what the future of their employment is.
Okay, so I guess you've summarized your take on that, which is the decline of the industry. It's really sunset industry, so all the 56,000 jobs are going to be lost. What are you suggesting that what should happen to those 56,000 workers? You want to see a just transition strategy? What should that look like?
Yeah, so in the report, we're not particularly prescriptive on what the future jobs are. We map out a number of different possible pathways for new employment, for reskilling, retraining. We did an analysis where we looked at skills matches for jobs and found that about 3/4 of current jobs, current work is entirely transferable into new decarbonized jobs. So whether that's in renewable energy, wind and solar, or things like decommissioning oil wells, doing geothermal installations, a range of industrial manufacturing, chemical industry jobs. There are a whole bunch of different things that can be done with varying levels of reskilling and retraining. There are some caveats around that. So the rate of pay isn't always the same. The level of unionization isn't always the same. So we do make some recommendations about how government can be more involved in ensuring that the transferability of the jobs isn't just technical, but is also like social and economic. So there's not a loss in quality of job when workers make those transitions. One of the best ways to ensure that that the workers are well cared for in this transition is to have them be actually involved in the planning. So that's one of the very top line recommendations that we put forward in this report. I think it's worth noting that the report is a co-publication between Climate Action Network Canada as a climate organization and Blue Green Canada, which is a consortium of environmental and labor organizations. And when we did the press conference yesterday to release the report, we were joined by representatives from Unifor and United Steelworkers, who represent a huge swath of the Canadian fossil fuel workforce. So we're all on board together, amplifying these recommendations.
Now, I think the Canadian government is generally given credit for having a suite of climate and energy policies that will get Canada to net zero by 2050. There's been a couple of reports out lately that show a small gap between our ambition and where we need to be, or what we've actually got on the books. Okay, fine, we're close. But this issue of where workers stand in it, I think is still one that the federal government anyway hasn't grappled with adequately. And what kind of signals or feedback are you getting from Ottawa about where they stand on, a just transition for workers?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of early days in some ways. In some ways, it's really late to the game, and in some ways, it's early days for that conversation. So the conversation around just transition more generally has been happening for decades. Labor unions, labor voices have been leading this conversation for more than 20 years internationally. There are international just transition principles that have been clearly outlined. But at the federal level in Canada, the work is still relatively new. So we saw the Just Transition Task Force for coal workers and communities a few years ago in 2018. They tabled their recommendations after broad consultations with affected communities and workers. And that was in support of the coal phase out. What we haven't seen is the next leveling up of that, where that work is also applied to the inevitable decline of the rest of the fossil fuel industry, so oil and natural gas as well. Just before the federal election, I'm sure you know that the Minister of Natural Resources launched a consultation on just transition. The deadline for submissions to that consultation were recently extended by a bit. So it's still an open consultation, but for the federal government right now, that whole process of doing consultation, engagement, and developing just transition legislation, policy, whatever it might be, is still really early from their perspective. So we haven't had a lot of engagement yet. On the flip side, in civil society, we have been talking about this for quite a long time to try to make sure that we have good alignment across the climate and labor movements, so that we're all pulling in the same direction, asking for the same things, and not inadvertently undermining one another's demand sets.
Well, Teika, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate your insights.
Yeah, it's been great to talk to you. Thanks so much.